guess this show's called The Jeremy Kyle Show, right? But it could be called The Show.
When it comes to reality television, few shows have ever felt as bulletproof as The Jeremy Kyle Show. Running for over 14 years with over 3,000 episodes, it was a staple of British daytime TV. Simple. A constant barrage of confrontational arguments, lie detector tests, and tearful confessions, all orchestrated by the no-nonsense host, Jeremy Kyle. It was labelled as entertainment, but in truth, it often felt more like a human zoo, with its guests paraded in front of an audience for ridicule, scorn, and/or pity. By this, it drew in millions of viewers, its appeal rooted in the chaos and dysfunction it broadcast daily. It seemed uncancellable, until it wasn't. The show's sudden cancellation in 2019 shocked many who believed it was way too popular and too ingrained in British culture to face any real repercussions. But like a house of cards, it all came crashing down in the wake of one horrible incident. In May of that year, one of the show's guests, Steve Dymond, took his own life just days after failing a lie detector test on the program. It was the moment that the world could no longer look away from the reality that the Jeremy Kyle Show was more than just trashy entertainment. It was harmful, exploitative, and at its worst, dangerous. So how did a show that had weathered years of controversy, complaints, and accusations finally meet its demise? Let's break it down. First off, the Jeremy Kyle Show had long been criticized for its treatment of vulnerable people. While it presented itself as a platform for resolving conflicts and helping people in dire situations, the reality was much darker. Guests were often individuals struggling with addiction, mental health issues, or even deep personal trauma. Instead of providing support, the show turned these real human struggles into a spectacle, with Kyle himself acting as a ringmaster, dishing out harsh judgments, shouting down on his guests, and playing up the drama for the cameras. The host's signature style was abrasive, and I'm putting that mildly, but it fed into the show's appeal. People tuned in to watch Kyle lay down the law, berating guests who had been set up to fail from the very moment they agreed to appear on the show. For years, it seemed like no amount of backlash could even dent the show. Even though it was accused of exploiting people's pain for profit, the ratings kept rolling in, and ITV stood by their cash cow. Critics and commentators alike labelled it everything from toxic to poverty exploitation, but it felt untouchable. After all, it was the UK's answer to Jerry Springer, a show where the messier the drama, the better. The bigger the breakdowns, the higher the ratings. That is, until Steve Dymond's untimely passing changed everything. This wasn't the first time a reality TV guest had taken their own life, following a public shaming on national television. Love Island faced similar issues, leading to widespread discussions about the ethics of reality TV and the duty of care that networks owe to their participants. But with the Jeremy Kyle Show, it hit differently. This wasn't just a dating show where fame-hungry contestants willingly stepped into the limelight. This is a show where people who were often struggling in life's darkest corners were pushed onto stage and exposed in their rawest, most vulnerable states for the amusement of the masses. Dymond's passing cast a glaring light on the failings behind the scenes. It became clear that the Jeremy Kyle Show wasn't just irresponsible, it was dangerous. For example, the lie detector tests, which were a frequent feature of the show, were not 100% reliable, but that never stopped the show from presenting them as gospel truth. The guests often put their lives, relationships, and reputations on the line, believing that the test results would clear their name or vindicate them. In reality, the results often led to further humiliation, a loss in trust, and in Dymond's case, fatal consequences. After his passing, the floodgates opened. Former guests came forward detailing how they were manipulated, coerced, and mishandled by the production team. Some described being offered alcohol before even going on stage, while others spoke about how their mental health issues were ignored or downplayed in favor of creating a more entertaining episode. Behind the curtain, the show was clearly just as shady, one that pushed people to the brink for the sake of a few minutes of TV drama. ITV acted quickly after Dymond's passing, pulling the episode he appeared in and suspending production of the show. But the damage was already done, and just days later, the network announced that The Jeremy Kyle Show had permanently been cancelled. The decision was met with a mix of relief and disbelief. How could a show that had been on air for 14 years, with millions of loyal viewers, suddenly just vanish? For many, it felt like it was about time. A long overdue reckoning for a show that had crossed the line way too many times. But the reality is that the Jeremy Kyle show was only cancelled because it became impossible to ignore the consequences of its existence. The sad story of Steve Dymond couldn't be spun or buried under PR statements. It was the moment that the show's toxic formula was laid bare for the world to see, and even the most die-hard fans had to confront the fact that this wasn't just mindless entertainment, it had real, life-shattering impacts. Of course, the show's producers attempted damage control. They claimed that the guests were carefully screened, supported, and even offered extensive aftercare. But these reassurances sounded hollow. What became clear after Dymond's passing was that the entire production was built on a lie. Kyle was there to help people and sort out their lives. The reality was much uglier. Kyle wasn't some prodigal son, he was more like an executioner in a cheap suit, waving around paternity tests and lie detectors like weapons. The show was never about helping people or healing families. It was about creating the next big blow up for the cameras, a moment of pure car crash TV that would rake in the ratings. Irony here is that Jeremy Kyle often portrayed himself as the moral authority on his show. He positioned himself as the stern voice of reason, calling out people's failures, tearing into their poor choices, and often delivering smug monologues about personal responsibility. But in the end, the show's downfall was the result of a complete lack of responsibility, both from Kyle and from ITV. They were willing to turn a blind eye to the very real harm being inflicted on the guests, so long as the show kept delivering its lucrative blend of misery and humiliation. Oh, and let's not forget, the Jeremy Kyle show had already survived numerous scandals over the years. Lawsuits, complaints to Ofcom, allegations of manipulation. None of it seemed to matter. The show was way too big to fail. It was woven into the fabric of daytime television, appealing to an audience that lapped up the endless cycle of confrontations. And why wouldn't they? It was reality TV at its most addictive, raw, messy, and completely unfiltered. But the truth was, the show had always been walking a tightrope, balancing entertainment with exploitation. In the aftermath of the cancellation, Jeremy Kyle largely disappeared from the public eye, at least for a little while. He attempted to position himself as the victim in all of this, claiming he was unfairly treated and targeted by the media. But let's be real, Kyle was the architect of his own downfall. He built a show that was designed to degrade and dehumanize. And well, it just caught up with him in the end. The moral high ground he once claimed to stand on crumbled right beneath his feet. And the reality is, the Jeremy Kyle show should have been cancelled long before any of this even happened. If anything, the show should serve as a lesson on how far reality TV can go when there are no boundaries, no accountability, and no regard for the people whose lives are being used as fodder for entertainment. At its core, the show's cancellation wasn't just about one horrific event, it was about a systemic failure that allowed a toxic, harmful environment to thrive for over a decade. In the end, the Uncancellable Jeremy Kyle show got cancelled because it couldn't hide from its own ugly truth anymore. When the consequences of trash TV became way too real to ignore, the show was rightfully taken off the air. But the question still remains, how many lives were damaged along the way? How did it take this long for people to realize that the price of a few cheap thrills was way too high?